It started on a night when the world felt heavier than usual, and the air itself seemed to press down on Emily's chest as she drove along the narrow country road, leading away from her college campus. Her old sedan humming like a tired animal, the headlights cutting thin slices of light into the trees that loomed on either side, their bare branches clawing at the sky. She had stayed late at the library, too late, and by the time she decided to leave, the lot was nearly empty. Only a couple of cars, scattered under dim yellow lamps that flickered as though protesting the weight of the darkness around them. Emily was not a timid girl. She prided herself on being rational, grounded. But that night when she slid behind the wheel, she had the unshakable feeling that someone was watching her from the shadowy corner of the lot. She had glanced quickly in her mirror, the kind of look that is too fast to focus on anything but just long enough to stir unease. And though the lot had been empty, she was certain she saw movement, a shape too tall and too narrow slipping between the parked cars. She drove quickly, gripping the wheel tighter than she needed to, telling herself it was just exhaustion and too much caffeine making her jittery. Yet, when she reached the long stretch of road that cut through the woods, she caught sight of something in her rearview mirror, a flicker of shadow running along the tree line, keeping pace with her car though she was going 40 miles an hour. She leaned forward, eyes wide, convinced it was a trick of the lights, the reflection of branches swaying in the headlights. But her heart sank when the figure appeared again, closer this time, as if it had no weight, no body to restrain it, as if it was sliding instead of running. And when she pressed the accelerator, the shadow seemed to glide faster, keeping beside her until she reached a sharp curve where the trees broke open into a clearing. For a moment she lost sight of it and her chest eased, but when she looked back into the mirror, her blood turned cold, for she saw her own reflection, but not quite right. Her reflection was smiling, lips curled into a grin that did not belong to her face, a grin filled with hunger and malice. And before she could scream, the reflection blinked, slower than a human blink, like a predator closing its eyes before the kill. She slammed her hand against the mirror, snapping it sideways so she would not have to see it. And then she drove the rest of the way home without daring to look again. Her apartment was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears strain as though searching for a sound hidden beneath it. And though she locked the door behind her and tossed her bag on the couch, she could not shake the feeling she had not come home alone. She showered quickly, steam fogging the bathroom mirror. And as she wiped it with her towel, she froze, for her reflection did not move with her hand. It lagged by a fraction of a second, its eyes watching her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she could not. She whispered to herself that she was imagining it, that she was tired, but the reflection tilted its head in the wrong direction, right when she tilted left, and Emily stumbled back, knocking over the toothbrush cup as water splattered the tiles. She ran to her bedroom, closed the door, and pulled the covers over her head like a child warding off monsters. But in the dark beneath the blanket, she saw it. Not with her eyes, but with something deeper. A shadow crouched at the corner of her bed, waiting. The next morning, she told herself it had been a nightmare, her rational mind clinging to explanations. But when she passed the mirror in the hallway, her reflection was not dressed as she was. She wore her usual jeans and sweatshirt, but in the glass, the figure wore something darker, a long dress that looked damp and stained, her hair hanging in wet strings over her face. Emily's breath caught, and she backed away slowly, not daring to look too long. But when she reached for her phone on the table, the screen lit up by itself, showing the camera, and in the corner of the frame stood a shadowy outline that stretched up the wall behind her, though no one else was in the apartment. She stopped going to class after that, too afraid to be outside, yet being inside offered no safety. At night, she would hear footsteps pacing her living room, soft and slow as though someone were dragging their feet, and when she peered through the crack of her bedroom door, the lights would flicker and the shadows would shift in ways that made no sense, stretching toward her like hungry fingers. One night, she gathered the courage to record it, setting her phone on the counter with the camera facing the room. And when she replayed the footage, her stomach turned to ice. There was nothing at first, just the dim glow of her lamp, but then the shadows began to pull away from the walls, thickening and twisting until a figure took shape, impossibly tall with arms that seemed too long, its face featureless, except for a mouth that tore open across where its cheeks should have been, a jagged black hole that moved as though whispering her name. She ran to her neighbor the next morning, Mrs. Callahan, an old woman who had lived in the building for years, and poured out her story in a rush of trembling words. The old woman listened, her wrinkled face pale, and finally said something that made Emily's blood run cold. She said years ago, a young girl in the building had been found dead in her bathroom, drowned, though there was no water. And ever since then, some tenants complained of shadows that did not belong to them, reflections that smiled when they should not. Most of them moved away, but Mrs. Callahan stayed because she had learned never to look too long into the glass, never to acknowledge the thing that followed. Emily's hands shook as she begged for help, but Mrs. Callahan only closed her door with a warning. If you keep seeing it, it means it has already chosen you. By the end of that week, Emily barely slept, her body aching with exhaustion, her eyes red from tears she tried to hold back, and still the shadows did not leave her. They grew bolder, standing at the foot of her bed, whispering from behind her closet door, crawling along the ceiling when she lay frozen under her sheets. One evening, she finally decided she would not be hunted anymore. She would confront it, so she lit every candle she had, stood in front of the mirror in her hallway, and demanded to know what it wanted. At first, the reflection mimicked her. Then it began to smile again, wider and wider, until its mouth split across its face, black liquid dripping down the glass, and it leaned closer, pressing its forehead to the mirror, whispering in a voice that rattled her bones, "You brought me home." The glass began to crack, spiderweb lines spreading as though something on the other side was pushing to get through, and Emily screamed as the shadow's hand pressed out, a long black arm stretching into her world. She stumbled back, but her apartment was already consumed, the walls bending with darkness, the air growing thick and heavy until she could barely breathe. The last thing she saw before her vision went black was her reflection stepping through the shattered mirror, wearing her face but not her eyes, eyes that were now hollow pits of night, and it smiled as it whispered again, but this time the voice came from her own throat. The next morning, her neighbors swore they saw Emily leaving the building, her steps calm and steady, her face pale but smiling. Yet those who looked closely swore something was wrong. Her shadow on the pavement did not move with her body. It moved just a second too late, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. And when Mrs. Callahan saw her pass by, she shut her blinds and locked her door, whispering a prayer. For she knew the girl walking outside was no longer Emily at all. It was the shadow that followed her home and finally found its place inside her skin.